Dead ends. The girl who called 911 and was ignored. She called 911 at 11:47 p.m. The call lasted 4 minutes and 32 seconds. She gave her name. She gave her address. And then she said, clearly, without screaming, with the kind of controlled terror that only comes from knowing you don't have much time, that someone was trying to get inside her home. The dispatcher told her to stay calm. The dispatcher told her help was on the way. No unit was ever dispatched. The call was logged, assigned a priority code, and buried beneath 17 other calls that came in during the same shift. By the time anyone reviewed it the following morning, the decision had already been made, quietly, unofficially, the way these decisions always are, that it didn't meet the threshold for immediate response. Her name was Valerie Morse. She was 23 years old. She lived alone in a second-floor apartment in Delray Beach, Florida. She had moved there 8 months earlier for a new job. She didn't know many people in the city yet. She had called her mother twice that week. She had renewed her lease just 10 days before. She was found the next morning by her downstairs neighbor who noticed her door was open. The 911 call still exists in the public record. You can hear her voice. You can hear exactly what she said. You can hear the dispatcher's calm, procedural responses. And then you can read the incident report filed the next day, the one that lists the call as resolved with no action required. That is where this story begins, and that is where the system failed her. Delray Beach sits on the eastern edge of Palm Beach County, Florida. It's the kind of city that looks like paradise from the outside. White sand, Atlantic coastline, pastel storefronts along Atlantic Avenue. Tourists come for the beaches. Retirees come for the weather. Young professionals come because the rent is cheaper than Miami and the commute is manageable. Valerie Morse came for a job. She had graduated from the University of Georgia in May 2019 with a degree in communications. She wasn't a straight-A student, but she was focused, driven in the quiet way that doesn't announce itself. Her professors remembered her as someone who asked the right questions. Her friends remembered her as the one who always showed up, to help someone move, to sit with someone through a hard night, to remember the details other people forgot. She accepted a position as a junior content coordinator at a digital marketing firm based in Boca Raton. The commute from Delray Beach was 20 minutes on a good day. She took the job in September 2019. She signed the lease on her apartment on Lawson Boulevard 2 weeks later. The apartment was small, 600 square feet on the second floor of a 2-story building. It had 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a galley kitchen, and a sliding glass door that opened onto a narrow balcony overlooking the parking lot. The building had no security cameras. The front entrance had a keypad lock that residents frequently propped open with a rubber doorstop. She had told her mother about the doorstop. Her mother, Linda Morse, would later recall that Valerie had mentioned it almost in passing, not as a complaint, just as an observation. "The front door is always open, Mom. Anyone could walk in." Linda had told her to talk to the building manager. Valerie said she would. There is no record that she ever did. In the 8 months she lived there, Valerie built a small, careful life. She worked long hours during the week. On weekends, she ran 5 miles, sometimes 6, along the beach path that cuts south from Atlantic Dunes Park. She had a standing Sunday call with her sister, Rachel, who was living in Atlanta. She was saving money. She had started looking at apartments with better security. She had 2 close friends in Delray Beach. One was a co-worker named Priya Anand, who sat 2 desks away from her at the office and described her later to investigators as the most self-contained person I've ever met. Not cold, just private. The other was a man named Daniel Farrow, whom she had met at a coffee shop in February 2020 and seen casually for about 6 weeks before they agreed, mutually and without drama, that it wasn't working. Daniel Farrow would become a person of interest within 48 hours of Valerie's death. He was cleared 11 months later. But we'll get to that. The weeks before the night of April 14th, 2020 were not, by any visible measure, unusual for Valerie. She worked. She ran. She called her mother. She ordered groceries online because the pandemic had just begun to shut things down, and she was being careful. She wore a mask to the mailbox. She wiped down her packages. She was, by every account, a young woman who was paying attention to the world around her. She noticed things, which is why, when she called 911 at 11:47 p.m. on the night of April 14th, the people who knew her have never doubted, not for a single moment, that she had a real reason to be afraid. The last person to speak with Valerie Morse before she called 911 was her mother. Linda Morse remembers the call. It was a Tuesday night. They talked for about 20 minutes. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Valerie mentioned she was tired. She said work had been stressful. The pandemic had moved her team to remote, and the apartment felt smaller when it was also an office. She said she was going to make tea and go to bed early. Linda said goodnight. That was at 11:19 p.m. 28 minutes later, Valerie called 911. The recording of that call has been reviewed in full. What follows is an accurate account of its content, not a transcript, but a precise reconstruction of what was said and how. Valerie's voice is steady when the call connects. She identifies herself immediately. She gives her address, 1140 Lowson Boulevard, Apartment 2C, Delray Beach. She tells the dispatcher that she heard someone on her balcony, that she saw the handle of the sliding glass door move, that she had turned off all the lights and moved to her bedroom closet where she was calling from. The dispatcher asks if she can see anyone. She says no. She says she can hear movement outside the sliding door. She says the building's front entrance is often left unlocked. The dispatcher asks if the door is locked now. She says yes. She says she pushed the security bar into the track herself after she heard the noise. The dispatcher tells her units are being notified. Valerie asks how long it will take. The dispatcher says she can't give an exact time, but that someone will be there. There is a pause. Then Valerie says quietly, "I don't think he's leaving." The dispatcher tells her to stay where she is and stay on the line. 40 seconds later, the call ends. The dispatcher's log entry reads, "Caller reported possible prowler. Caller advised to remain inside. Call resolved. No unit available for immediate dispatch. Low priority reassignment pending. Low priority." Those two words. At 11:47 p.m. on April 14th, 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic that had emptied the streets and confined people to their homes, a 23-year-old woman called from inside her closet and reported an active intruder on her balcony, and the official classification was low priority. No unit was dispatched that night. Not at midnight. Not at 1 a.m. Not at any point during the remaining hours of darkness. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15th, Valerie's downstairs neighbor, a retired school teacher named Carol Hines, left her apartment to retrieve her morning newspaper and noticed that the door to apartment 2C was standing open. Not ajar. Open. She called up from the base of the stairs. No answer. She climbed the stairs and pushed the door wider. Carol Hines called 911 at 7:24 a.m. This time, a unit arrived in 6 minutes. What responding officers found inside apartment 2C has been documented in the Palm Beach County Medical Examiner's report, case number ME 2020-041187. Valerie Morse was found in her bedroom. The sliding glass door to the balcony had been forced open. The security bar she had placed in the track had been dislodged, consistent with sustained external pressure applied from above. There were marks on the exterior balcony railing consistent with someone having climbed up from the parking lot below. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. The time of death was estimated between midnight and 2 a.m., which means she survived the call. She survived it, stayed in that closet, waited for help that never came, and then, at some point in the hours that followed, the door she had locked was forced open anyway. She was 23 years old. She had renewed her lease 10 days before. She had told her mother she was going to make tea. The first officers on scene that morning were from the Delray Beach Police Department. They arrived at 7:30 a.m., 8 minutes after Carol Hines made the call. 6 patrol units, eventually, a supervisor, then a detective, then, by mid-morning, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office was notified and a joint investigation was opened. On paper, the response looked thorough. It wasn't. The first critical error happened within the first hour. The sliding glass door, the point of entry, the single most important piece of physical evidence in the case, was handled by at least 3 different officers before the crime scene technician arrived. Photographs taken by the lead technician, submitted as part of case file DBPD 2020-04-1521, show partial boot prints on the balcony railing that were later determined to be inconsistent with standard-issue police footwear. The origin of those prints was never conclusively established. The railing was not treated as a primary evidence surface until nearly 4 hours after the scene was first accessed. 4 hours. The second error involved the building's front entrance. Investigators confirmed early on that the keypad lock on the main entrance had been propped open the previous night, consistent with what Valerie had told the 911 dispatcher. A rubber doorstop was recovered from the base of the door. It was photographed and logged, but no one canvassed the building's other residents until 36 hours after the body was discovered. By then, 2 tenants had already left for the week. One of them, a man who lived in the ground floor unit directly beneath the balcony, was never formally interviewed. His name appears in the case file exactly once, in a list of building residents, with the notation, "Not reached." Not reached. He was living 15 feet below where Valerie Morse was killed. The third error, and the one that would define the next 2 years of this investigation, was the almost immediate focus on Daniel Farrow. Farrow was Valerie's most recent ex. They had dated briefly. It had ended without incident. By every account from mutual acquaintances, there was no hostility, no conflict, nothing that would distinguish their breakup from thousands of others. But he was accessible. He was local. He had a connection to the victim. And within 48 hours of the discovery of Valerie's body, he had been brought in for questioning twice. His phone records had been subpoenaed, and his name had leaked to at least one local news outlet. The Delray Beach Police Department never formally named Farrow as a suspect. They didn't have to. The leak did the work. Meanwhile, the actual forensic evidence, what little had been properly collected, sat largely unprocessed. The Palm Beach County Crime Lab, operating under pandemic-related staffing reductions in April 2020, had a backlog of over 300 cases. Touch DNA samples collected from the balcony railing were submitted on April 17th. They were not processed until September 9th, 145 days later. 145 days. In those 5 months, the investigation produced no new leads. No witnesses came forward. No surveillance footage from neighboring properties had captured anything usable, and it's worth noting that footage from a gas station 2 blocks away, which investigators initially flagged as potentially relevant, was requested 11 days after the crime. The station's system overwrote footage after 72 hours. The footage was gone before anyone asked for it. Investigators also failed to fully pursue one specific lead that emerged in the first week. A resident of the building, a woman named Teresa Campos, who lived in apartment 1B, told officers during her initial interview that she had heard footsteps on the exterior staircase sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. on the night of the 14th. She said she remembered because she had looked at her phone to check the time, and she remembered thinking it was late for someone to be coming home. Teresa Campos was interviewed once. She was never asked to provide a formal statement. Her account does not appear in the main investigative summary filed with the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office. It exists only in a supplemental interview log, page 47 of a 63-page document, where it is summarized in 2 sentences and assigned no follow-up action. 2 sentences. For the only witness who reported hearing someone on the stairs that night. There is a document that exists within the Delray Beach Police Department's internal records that most people have never heard of. It is called a Priority Dispatch Review Form. Every 911 call that is logged and not immediately dispatched is supposed to generate one. The form requires a supervising dispatcher to review the call within 2 hours, reassess the priority classification, and either confirm or escalate the response level. If the original classification is confirmed, the supervisor signs off. If it is escalated, a unit is dispatched. For the call made by Valerie Morse at 11:47 p.m. on April 14, 2020, no priority dispatch review form was ever completed, not confirmed, not escalated, not reviewed. The form simply does not exist. When this was raised during a Palm Beach County oversight hearing in March 2021, nearly a year after Valerie's death, the then director of the Delray Beach Emergency Communications Center, a man named Ronald Spite, testified that the failure was the result of an administrative oversight consistent with high-volume call periods. An administrative oversight. Valerie Morse called from inside her closet. She said someone was on her balcony. She said the building's front door was routinely left unlocked. She said she didn't think he was leaving. And the system's response, its formal, documented, institutional response, was to generate a form that was never filled out, supervised by a protocol that was never followed, in a department that would later describe her death as the result of an administrative oversight. But the failures didn't begin and end with that night. They began long before April 14th. In 2018, 2 years before Valerie moved to Delray Beach, the Palm Beach County Inspector General's office conducted a routine audit of the Emergency Communications Center. The audit identified 3 specific systemic issues: insufficient overnight staffing levels, an outdated priority classification algorithm that had not been updated since 2009, and a pattern of low-priority designations being applied to calls involving single female callers reporting suspicious activity at residential addresses. That last finding is worth repeating. A pattern, documented in 2018, of low-priority designations being applied to calls from single women reporting suspicious activity at home. The audit recommended corrective action on all 3 issues. The recommendations were acknowledged by department leadership. A timeline for implementation was established. By April 2020, none of the 3 corrective actions had been fully implemented. The staffing levels had not changed. The classification algorithm had not been updated. And the pattern, the specific, documented, named pattern of underresponding to calls from single women at residential addresses, had not been addressed in any formal, measurable way. This was not speculation. This was not the conclusion of an advocacy group or a plaintiff's attorney. This was the finding of the county's own oversight body, sitting unaddressed in an audit report for 2 years, while Valerie Morse moved to Delray Beach, signed her lease, renewed it, and eventually called for help from inside her closet. The failures extended beyond the dispatch center. The building at 1140 Lowson Boulevard had been the subject of 2 prior police calls in the 18 months before Valerie's death. One involved a reported break-in attempt on a ground-floor unit in November 2018. The other involved a noise complaint that, when officers arrived, revealed an unsecured rear access point, a gate latch that had been broken for months. Both incidents were documented. Neither triggered any formal communication to the building's management requiring security upgrades. The broken gate latch was still broken on April 14, 2020. And then there is the matter of the 911 call itself, specifically the training and conduct of the dispatcher who took it. The dispatcher on duty that night was a 12-year veteran of the Communications Center. Her performance record shows no prior disciplinary actions. She followed the protocol as she understood it. She logged the call. She advised the caller. She assigned a priority code. What she did not do, what the protocol in its 2009 version did not require her to do, was ask Valerie Morse a single question about the physical layout of her apartment. Whether the balcony door had a secondary lock, whether she had a phone charger in the closet, whether anyone knew she was home. Simple questions. Basic questions. The kind of questions that a modern, updated protocol would have included as standard. The 2009 protocol didn't ask them, and so they weren't asked. In the months following Valerie's death, the Delray Beach Police Department issued a public statement expressing condolences to the Morse family and affirming its commitment to continuous improvement of emergency response procedures. The Priority Dispatch Review Form Protocol was updated in July 2020. Ronald Spite retired in December 2020. No one was disciplined, no one was terminated, no one was held formally accountable for the night Valerie Morse called from her closet and was told help was on the way. For 2 years, the case went nowhere. Daniel Farrow was cleared in March 2021, 11 months after Valerie's death, when his alibi was corroborated by cell tower data, time-stamped delivery app records, and a neighbor who confirmed he had been home all night. The DNA samples collected from the balcony railing came back with a partial profile. Not enough for a database match, not enough for an arrest. Enough only to confirm that the DNA did not belong to Daniel Farrow. The investigation was quietly downgraded. No active suspect, no new leads, no public updates. The Morse family hired a private investigator in the fall of 2021. His name was Gerald Ash. He was a former Broward County detective with 22 years of experience and a specific background in cold case methodology. Linda Morse paid him out of her retirement savings. She has never said how much. She has said only that it was worth it. Gerald Ash spent 4 months reviewing the case file. And then he found something. It was not a new piece of evidence. It was not a hidden witness or a secret document. It was something that had been in the case file from the beginning, something that had been collected, logged, and then overlooked with a thoroughness that, once you see it, is almost impossible to explain. On the morning of April 15th, 2020, the same morning Valerie's body was discovered, a patrol officer conducting an initial sweep of the building's exterior photographed the parking lot below the balcony of apartment 2C. Standard procedure. The photographs were logged into evidence. 31 images in total. Gerald Ash looked at all 31. In image number 19, a wide-angle shot of the northeast corner of the parking lot taken at approximately 8:15 a.m. There is a vehicle, a dark-colored pickup truck, partially visible at the edge of the frame, parked in a spot designated for visitors. The truck's rear license plate is not fully visible, but the front plate is. And in the high-resolution version of image 19, the version that exists in the Digital Evidence Archive and had apparently never been enlarged or enhanced, the plate is legible. Gerald Ash ran the plate. The truck was registered to a man named Carl Pruitt. Carl Pruitt was 41 years old at the time of Valerie's death. He lived in Lake Worth, Florida, 17 miles from Delray Beach. He had no prior connection to Valerie Morse, no shared workplace, no mutual acquaintances, no documented interaction of any kind. But Carl Pruitt had a record. In 2014, he had been arrested in St. Lucie County on charges of aggravated stalking and burglary of a dwelling. The victim in that case was a 26-year-old woman who lived alone. The method of entry in that case was a second-floor balcony. He had climbed the exterior of her building from the parking lot below. He had pleaded no contest. He had served 18 months. He had been released in 2016. He had completed his supervised release in 2018. And on the morning of April 15, 2020, hours after Valerie Morse was killed, in the parking lot directly below her balcony, his truck was sitting in the visitor parking spot, in plain sight, in photograph number 19. Which had been in the case file for 2 years. Gerald Ash brought his findings to the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office in February 2022. He brought the photograph. He brought the enhanced plate image. He brought Pruitt's prior record. He brought a documented analysis of the methodological similarities between the 2014 case and the circumstances of Valerie's death. The state attorney's office opened a formal reinvestigation in March 2022. Carl Pruitt was located in Lake Worth. He was still living there. He had never left the state. He had never been contacted by investigators, not in April 2020, not at any point in the 2 years that followed, because no one had ever looked closely enough at image number 19 to read the plate. No one. In 2 years of investigation, the photograph was there, the plate was there, the connection was there, and it took a retired detective, hired by a grieving mother with her retirement savings, 4 months of reviewing a case file that a fully funded law enforcement agency had closed without resolution, to find it. That is not a footnote. That is the case. See, Linda Morse still has the T. It sounds like a small thing. It isn't. After Valerie's apartment was cleared and her belongings were packed and brought to Linda's house in Athens, Georgia, there was a box of chamomile tea in the kitchen items, the kind Valerie always kept. Linda put it in her own cabinet. She has never opened it. She doesn't know why she keeps it. She knows exactly why she keeps it. She gave one interview in October 2022 to a reporter from the Palm Beach Post. She spoke for 2 hours. She said many things. The one that stayed, the one the reporter later said she couldn't get out of her head, was this. I keep thinking about those hours. Between when she called and when they found her. She was alive in there. She was waiting. And I just want to know, did she think help was coming? Did she believe it? Because if she believed it, then she waited for something that was never going to happen. And I don't know which is worse, knowing or not knowing. Rachel Morse, Valerie's younger sister, did not give interviews. She moved from Atlanta to Athens in the summer of 2021 to be closer to her mother. She took a remote job. She has not spoken publicly about her sister. The only public statement attributable to her is a single post on a private social media account, shared in court documents during the civil proceedings, that reads, "She called for help. That's all. She did exactly what you're supposed to do." Priya Anand, Valerie's closest friend at work, left the marketing firm in Delray Beach in June 2020. She moved back to her family in Houston. She testified during the civil case brought by the Morse family against the city of Delray Beach. Her testimony focused on a conversation she had with Valerie approximately 1 week before her death, a conversation in which Valerie had mentioned, again, the building's front door, the doorstop, the way anyone could walk in. Priya said she had told Valerie to report it. Valerie had said she didn't want to be the difficult tenant. That detail appeared in multiple legal filings. It became, quietly and without anyone explicitly naming it as such, one of the emotional centers of the civil case. The idea that Valerie had noticed a problem, had chosen not to escalate it because she didn't want to cause trouble, and had then called 911 when she had no other option, and had been failed there too. She did everything right, and the systems around her failed at every single point of contact. Carol Hines, the neighbor who found her, moved out of the building on Lowson Boulevard within 3 months of Valerie's death. She relocated to her daughter's home in Sarasota. She has spoken about that morning only once, in a brief statement to local news. "I hear that door in my sleep. I still hear it." Daniel Farrow, cleared of all suspicion in March 2021, left Delray Beach entirely. His name had been leaked to the press before he was ever formally named as a suspect, which means it was searchable, findable, permanently attached in certain corners of the internet to a crime he had nothing to do with. He lost nearly a year of his life to an investigation that was pointed at him instead of at a photograph sitting in an evidence archive that no one bothered to enlarge. The building at 1140 Lowson Boulevard still stands. The apartment was re-rented within 4 months of Valerie's death. The broken gate latch on the rear access point was repaired in August 2020, 4 months after Valerie died. No one ordered it fixed. Someone just fixed it. Let's be precise about what happened here. Not emotional, not broad, precise. Because the story of Valerie Morse is not simply a tragedy, it is a sequence of specific, identifiable, documented failures, each one committed by a named institution, each one traceable to a decision or an absence of decision, each one preventable. The first failure was the 911 dispatch classification. A 23-year-old woman called from inside her closet and reported an active intruder on her balcony. The call was classified as low priority using an algorithm that had not been updated since 2009, an algorithm that a county audit in 2018 had specifically identified as producing a pattern of underresponse to calls from single women at residential addresses. The classification was never reviewed. The required oversight form was never completed. A woman died during the window of time that form was supposed to close. The second failure was the crime scene response. The primary point of entry was contaminated before the forensic technician arrived. The parking lot was photographed, but the photographs were never fully analyzed. A license plate, visible, legible, in high resolution, sat in an evidence archive for 2 years without anyone reading it. Not because it was hidden, because no one looked. The third failure was investigative tunnel vision. Within 48 hours, the investigation had effectively narrowed to a single person of interest who had no forensic connection to the crime, no established motive, and a corroborated alibi. The focus on Daniel Farrow was not driven by evidence. It was driven by accessibility. The fourth failure was institutional inertia. The 2018 audit findings were acknowledged. A corrective timeline was established. Nothing was implemented. 2 years passed. A woman died. The protocol was updated 2 months after her death. The director retired 8 months after her death. The fifth failure was the absence of accountability. No dispatcher was disciplined. No investigator was formally censured. No supervisor was terminated. The civil case brought by the Morse family against the city of Delray Beach was settled in November 2023 for an undisclosed amount. As part of the settlement, the city admitted no wrongdoing. No wrongdoing. That is the official position of the city of Delray Beach regarding the night Valerie Morse called 911 and no one came. If you've made it this far, you already know this channel is different. Dead Ends exists for cases like this one. Cases where the failure wasn't random, wasn't inevitable, and wasn't invisible. Subscribe to Dead Ends. And stay with us for every case that was never truly closed. Because here is what the settlement, the retirement, and the updated protocol do not address. The pattern identified in 2018 was not unique to Delray Beach. In the 2 years following Valerie's death, investigative journalists at the Sun-Sentinel cross-referenced 911 dispatch data from 7 municipalities in Palm Beach and Broward counties. Their analysis, published in August 2022, found that calls from single female callers reporting suspicious activity at residential addresses were statistically more likely to receive low-priority classifications than equivalent calls from male callers or calls from addresses with multiple registered occupants. The disparity was not marginal. It was consistent. It held across different shifts, different dispatchers, different municipalities. It was, in the language of the report, a systemic pattern, not an isolated anomaly. Valerie Morse was not an anomaly. She was a data point in a pattern that existed before her and continued after her. That is the analysis. That is the critical finding. Not that one dispatcher made one mistake on one night, but that a documented, audited, unaddressed, systemic pattern placed Valerie Morse and women like her at measurably greater risk every time they picked up a phone and called for help. She called. The system had already decided, structurally and statistically, that her call was less urgent than it was. As of the time of this video, The case of Valerie Morse remains officially open. Carl Pruitt has not been charged. That requires a precise explanation, because the absence of charges is not, in this instance, a product of innocence. It is a product of evidence. Specifically, the gap between what exists and what a prosecutor needs to take a case to trial. Carl Pruitt's truck was photographed in the visitor parking lot of 1140 Lowson Boulevard on the morning of April 15, 2020. His prior conviction in St. Lucie County involved a methodologically similar crime. Second-floor balcony entry, single female victim living alone. The partial DNA profile recovered from the balcony railing of apartment 2C has not been matched to Pruitt, but it has not excluded him either. A full comparison requires a court-ordered DNA sample. As of the most recent public update from the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office, issued in September 2023, that court order has not been obtained. The State Attorney's Office has not explained why. Pruitt's attorney has stated publicly that his client denies any involvement in the death of Valerie Morse, and that any suggestion of guilt is based entirely on the presence of a legally parked vehicle in a public lot and a prior conviction for which his client has fully served his sentence. That is a legally accurate statement. It is also, depending on how you read the full case file, either a complete defense or a carefully constructed deflection. Sources familiar with the case, speaking to journalists at the Palm Beach Post in late 2023, indicated that investigators believe Pruitt is a strong person of interest, but that the evidentiary threshold for charges has not been met. The same sources indicated that the partial DNA profile, while insufficient for a match, has characteristics that investigators consider significant. What that means in practical terms is this. There is a man in Lake Worth, Florida, who investigators believe may have killed Valerie Morse. They cannot yet prove it. They are still trying. Or they were, as of late 2023. The case has received no significant public update since then. The Morse family's lawsuit against the city of Delray Beach was settled in November 2023. The city admitted no wrongdoing. Linda Morse, through her attorney, issued a brief statement. No amount of money brings Valerie back. We pursued this case because we wanted the record to show what happened. The record now shows it. What the city chooses to do with that record is their decision. A bill introduced in the Florida State Legislature in the 2023 session, informally referred to in advocacy circles as Valerie's Law, which would have mandated the use of updated gender-neutral dispatch algorithms statewide, did not advance out of committee. It was reintroduced in the 2024 session. As of this recording, its status remains pending. Gerald Ash, the private investigator who found image number 19, retired fully from investigative work in mid-2023. In a brief interview that same year, he was asked what he thought about when he thought about the Morse case. He said, "I think about the photograph. I think about how many times someone must have looked at that folder and not opened it. And I think, what else is sitting in a folder somewhere that no one has opened yet? What else is sitting in a folder somewhere? That question does not have an answer. Not yet." 4 minutes and 32 seconds. That is how long Valerie Morse stayed on the line. She did not panic. She did not scream. She gave her name, her address, a precise description of what she was hearing and where she was. She asked one question. She waited for an answer. She said quietly that she didn't think he was leaving. And then the call ended. And then nothing came. There is a version of this story where the failure is one dispatcher on one night during a global pandemic with too many calls and not enough units. That version is easier to hold. It has a human face. It has context. It almost makes sense. But that version isn't true. The true version is the audit report sitting on a county website since 2018. The true version is the algorithm that hadn't been updated in 11 years. The true version is the oversight form that was never generated, the photograph that was never enlarged, the witness statement that was summarized in 2 sentences and assigned no follow-up. The true version is a man in Lake Worth who has not been charged, a bill in Tallahassee that has not passed, and a mother in Athens, Georgia who has a box of chamomile tea in her cabinet that she has never opened. The true version does not resolve. It does not close. It sits, like image number 19, like the audit report, like the case file itself, waiting for someone to look closely enough. Valerie Morse was 23 years old. She renewed her lease 10 days before she died. She called her mother twice that week. She was going to make tea and go to bed. She called for help, that is all. She did exactly what you're supposed to do. If this case stays with you, share it. The more people know, the harder it becomes to ignore. Subscribe to Dead Ends, because some stories don't end. They just stop being told. End of script.